thank you all for joining. I'm very excited you're all here. I want to welcome you to another talk in our series Vantage Points. Today's event is Picturing Strangers, Street Portraiture, Connection, and Photography. And our guests tonight are Olga Ginzburg and Scott Rossi, and they will be in conversation with James Prochnik. Thanks again for being here. I am Anya from StrudelmediaLive. For those of you who don't know us yet, we offer live online photography classes. We organize photo talks. We also have a scholarship program, and we have a YouTube channel where you can view past talks. I want to briefly tell you about upcoming classes. We just announced our spring courses. All of our courses are live online and only small groups. We usually only accept about 8 students, and for some classes only 6 students, so that you can all talk to each other. We have a course coming up on techniques and exercises in color photography, another class on how you can create your own handmade hardcover photo book. There will be an InDesign class for those of you who would like to learn InDesign to design your own zine or photo book. And there's only one spot left for this class. We also offer 1 session mini workshops. And we have a series of those coming up. 3 of them will be about AI photography, and 2 will be about Lightroom if you want to improve your Lightroom skills. We will soon also offer new scholarships for one-on-one mentoring sessions with some of our teachers. So stay tuned for those, for the announcement for those scholarships. And Scott Rossi, who is here tonight, and he will teach a class for us soon, which I'm super excited about. His first round of the class sold out so fast that we added a second section, which will be an evening class. And the class will be called Photographing Strangers, Practical Tools and Ethical Questions. And Scott's class starts on May 7. I will put that into the chat if you want to check that out. Yeah, and now I would like to James will introduce Olga and Scott, and I just want to introduce James to you. James Prochnik is a Brooklyn-based photographer who uses photography as a means to explore the world outside, focusing on people, place, memory, and the poetry of the everyday. His photographs have been published in the New York Times, Vice Media, Lens Scratch, USA Today, and Shots Magazine, and have been exhibited in galleries throughout the US. In 2019, James launched New York City Photo Community, and that's a weekly newsletter listing photography events, workshops, exhibitions, and opportunities for photographers everywhere. You should also check out the Instagram account of New York City Photo Community. James has also been a regular guest lecturer on ethics and aesthetics in street photography at the University of Vermont. And that's very important, of course, James also teaches for StrudelmediaLive. He teaches street photography, poems and pictures, richness of light, and many other classes. And he will probably also teach, I say probably because it hasn't been completely confirmed yet, a summer class. So I hope that will happen. Stay tuned for the summer class by James, which we will be announcing in a few weeks. So if you have questions throughout the talk, please put them in the chat. There will be a Q&A at the end. You can then unmute yourself and ask directly. If you have a very important question in between, you can also ask directly. The talk will be about 1 hour and 15 minutes long. And I want to thank James for the idea of organizing this talk. And I want to also thank Olga and Scott for being here tonight. So everybody, I'm going to hand it over to James and have fun, enjoy. Thank you, James.
Thank you so much, Anya, for that great introduction. And thank you to Strudel Media and Anya and Edward for hosting us tonight here. Yeah, I'm very excited about this talk. I just briefly want to say street portraiture is the kind of photography that really like kind of unlocked photography from being an interest into being a passion. There's something about the risk of it, like walking up to a stranger and asking for a picture that like having that risk moment just became really exciting and rewarding. So I'm super excited to hear what Olga and Scott have to say today. I also just want to really quickly give a shout out to Deanna Arbus. It would have been her 101st birthday today, and she's one of my great influences in street portraiture. So without further ado, I'm going to give Scott Rossi's bio. Scott Rossi is a photographer based in New York who is originally from Canada. His work captures the poetic nuances of daily life. Scott and I both like poetry in our photography and the complex relationship between people and their environment. Rossi is a documentary practices and visual journalism program graduate from the International Center of Photography and holds a BA in psychology from the University of Victoria. Following his move to New York City in 2020, he began his project Commonplace, a visual meditation on Central Park, resulting in his first monograph. His work has been featured in or commissioned by the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Washington Post, Vogue, and the British Journal of Photography, among others. He has exhibited internationally at the Rotterdam Photo Festival, the International Center of Photography, and Photo 22 in Melbourne. And as Anya mentioned, he's teaching now for Strudel Media. Scott, take it away.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you so much for the intro. And also, I'll just double down on the thank you to StrudelmediaLive for hosting this, and for also to all of you for taking time out of your Thursday evening and spending it with us. It's really an honor to talk to so many people. This is awesome. Let me just hit the share screen here and I'll get started. Yeah, so to add to the bio that James read out, and it's so weird hearing somebody read your bio out loud, but to add to what he said, I am Canadian and I'm from the West Coast, and photography for me wasn't always in my life. I didn't really photograph at all until I was like maybe 25, 26, and I then even only kind of took snapshots of like my love life or my family, and it was very just sort of like kind of just casual going. It wasn't really a big deal in my life, and then I started shooting mostly street photography, and I really was like obsessed with capturing these fleeting, beautiful moments in life, and I thought it was just this magical medium of like, wow, look at what I could get, and look how beautiful it looked. And it was very Cartier-Bresson inspired and Winogrand inspired. And then in 2020, I moved to New York to attend ICP. And when I got here, something sort of changed in me. I mean, I continued sort of photographing street photography without anybody really knowing I was taking their picture. And I still have a huge admiration for street photography. But at school, there's sort of this pressure to get for your thesis project to have this sort of journalistic project, a project where maybe you're talking about something deep or something that's happening in the world. And so I really set out and I really wanted to do something like that. And being at 2020 in August, the pandemic was still pretty serious, and nobody would really let me into their lives on a personal level. So I lived in Hell's Kitchen, and it was about a 15-minute walk. If you're not familiar with New York, it's just a little bit south of Central Park. It was about a 15-minute walk up to the bottom of the park. And I started going there in September just to get away from my tiny little apartment. And I was taking these pictures, and the pictures I was taking were still street photography, still nobody knowing I was there, and it was very candid. And but then I just felt like I was going through the motions, like I wasn't really challenging myself or pushing myself to be any different, and I felt so comfortable, and I didn't want to be comfortable anymore. So I decided to start approaching everything differently, and I changed my camera, and I got a medium format camera, and I slowed down, and I started going to the park every single day, and I started to sort of just start to document everything that I saw. And so in this project, like with the idea that I had was to sort of I didn't really want to provide necessarily a narrative of the park to per se. I kind of just wanted to sort of show an idea of a place and convey it through photographs. And a big part of a place are the people, of course. And uh, I learned, like, I still have photos like this where they don't know I'm taking their picture, but I had to push myself to get over my fear of talking to a stranger, which is still scary right now. It's scary, to be honest. But I just had to follow my instincts and my curiosity. And this is true of my practice now since this project is, I never doubt my instinct or my curiosity. If it takes me down a path and I go left, and nothing comes of it, then that's just the way it is. That's just how it goes. And if I go right and something turns out to be beautiful, then that's fantastic. But I can't sit and regret or doubt myself. But I also didn't want to like have any preconceived notions about what I was doing. So I always wanted to just kind of like be open to anything and everything and be open to any sort of possibility. And a part of that is when you meet people, you know, there's a lot of nerves involved. And sometimes I would spend 5 or 20 or 30 minutes and pacing back and forth before I would walk up to somebody to say, hey, like, how are you? Can I take your picture? And it's a really wild experience to walk up to a random individual and say, hi, I want to take your picture. I have this camera and you look great. But this photo particularly was a huge moment for me. It was pretty early on in the project, and they were lying just like this. And I saw them from a distance, and I took about 10 minutes to build up the courage. But I got there, and they were totally down for me to take their picture, and they just looked so beautiful and so happy. And then it was at this point in the project as well where I started to do a lot of research about what the park actually is. And the park was sort of in the 1800s in New York, you know, nobody really lived above like Canal Street or 14th Street. Everybody lived in the lower parts of Manhattan, which is now like the financial district. And there was they didn't have a good drainage. They didn't, it's not modern New York. There was a lot of horses. It was a really sort of dirty place. And so they were desperate to come up with an idea to allow people to escape the confines of like this lower Manhattan, this struggle, this like metropolis, burgeoning place that's about to happen. And so they came up with this contest, and the winners of the contest were Carl Vox and Frederick Olmsted, and they designed Central Park. And so once I knew this too, the idea behind the park was to create this sort of magical place, this place where people could be themselves and explore and spread out and do whatever they wanted to do with life. And they didn't want to make a park like the European parks at the time with these perfect little flowers and these fences and these pathways that you can't veer off of. They wanted to create a place that felt really natural. So I thought, well, then I'm going to try to show what that is in a way without being super literal about it, because I didn't really want, I don't want to, another thing that I always jostle with is I feel like in photography and maybe in art in general, there's like fiction on one side and then there's journalism on the other. And I think that the most drama and the most interesting things happen right in the middle, where all this sort of mixes together and you have this melting pot of like of everything sort of happening. And I just love what happens in the gray area. And I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to do this project, I don't necessarily want people to know it's Central Park. When in the book sequence, you know, I don't tell you it's Central Park until the very last page. And maybe if you're from New York, you know, you might know that this is Central Park, or on this photo here, you might, in the reflection, you might know the skyline. But if you're not, then you might still be thinking right now in the sequence, like, you know, where am I? Where's that path lead? What is he doing? Why are we here? You know, like, oh, this could be a city now, but I still don't really know where it is. And I kind of wanted it to be this mysterious sort of like you're being led down this walk, and, you know, maybe you're taking a couple wrong corners and you're discovering some people, or you're going the right way and you're meeting some beautiful families. And I really wanted it to be this natural experience. And, you know, and another thing that I'm always thinking about with this project is we live in a world now where all of our experiences are commodified. Like everything is content, you know, like everywhere you go, there's a price for admission, or there's a ticket, or there's a wall that's painted specifically for you to stand in front of and take your picture. And it all feels it just doesn't sit right with me. And I feel like parks are sort of this last refuge of, you know, where you can mark your students' papers in your suit, or sit outside in your underwear and hang out on a rock by yourself without being judged, because it's an open space for you to do whatever you want. That's the entire point. And so yeah, these are things that I constantly thought about while I was there. And I really I really I really think that they're important. And another thing I want to say about approaching strangers is there's sort of this, you know, in order to talk to somebody, in order for them to accept you to take your picture, you know, that takes a lot of vulnerability from them, and it takes a lot of trust. And it also takes, for you to get, from my opinion, to get an interesting picture, I have to also be very vulnerable, and I have to also be quite intimate with them. And if I'm expecting them to give something to me, I have to be willing to give something of myself to them. And we create this trust and this relationship, and it becomes this collaboration. And it's no longer just me finding them interesting and snapping a picture and walking away. It becomes this interaction and this beautiful thing. And sometimes it lasts 5 minutes because, you know, he wants to go back to lounging, and sometimes it lasts 5 hours. Sometimes I see them again another day, or in other projects, they invite me to their house and we have dinner. It really just depends on how it goes, and it depends on the individual. But in my experience, the best pictures come from a place of that shared intimacy and trust and vulnerability. And it's I often imagine myself in their shoes. You know, like I'm hanging out with my friend or my partner at a park, or or I'm walking down the sun in my other project. You know, I'm walking down the side of the road, and this guy veers off the road and pulls over and hops out of his car, and he's holding a camera and he's staring at me, and he goes like, "Hey, you, like, can I take your picture?" And I imagine if I was this person, I'd probably be like, "Who is this person? And why are they randomly pulling over in front?" It's like it's ridiculous, really, what we do as photographers. But it's also magical and strange. And I think, again, this is why I'm talking about that middle space between the fiction and the journalism, because there's, sorry, well, I gotta tell you, I gotta have a drink. When you have this everything sort of mixing together, and you let all the walls down, it's when things sort of become sort of real, and in a way also performative at the same time. You know, like I often think, like a fly on the wall, for example, or they get so used to you that they don't know you anymore. I often question this, because sometimes when people become so used to you, they know you're there, and therefore it's hard to really know if they're being themselves. And I feel like there's always sort of this playful element to it as well, which I love. And I think it's just I guess in a way it is truly who they are, if that's how they choose to act with you. And I know that I'm horrible on the other side of the camera. When anybody tries to take my picture, it's absolutely awful. Like I don't know how to be myself. And I think that's because, I mean, I guess I got my own issues, but I think it's just like it's tough being on the other side, and it's tough to give so much of yourself to a camera. So I'm very thankful for all these people saying yes to me. Um, but yeah, and I learned through this project was definitely the leapfrog for me, but I learned so much that the camera is just this beautiful excuse to go out and experience the world, and learn about different cultures and different places and different people and different backgrounds. And by way of doing that, I learned so much about myself. And I think, like, I wouldn't have approached these three men on a normal day without a camera, personally. That's not in my personality. Maybe at a bar at night we talk or something, but in the park, I would not randomly walk up to these people and start talking to them. But with the camera, suddenly I feel like inclined to do so. And I think it's just this magical tool that just puts you into these most random places and circumstances. And you learn so much about the world with a camera, or you can, I guess. You don't have to, but I find that I am learning so much about the world through my camera. Like, and I'll go back to the playfulness. Like this man, I met him and we talked for a long time, and we went through all these pictures where I had him lying down and I had him sort of kind of posing for me, and I thought it, and it wasn't really working, and then I kind of was over it, and but he was telling me this story about you know, how he avoided going to the Vietnam War, and he was trying to show me something on his phone, and then he looked at me like this, and then there, you know, there it is. And that's the picture. And I couldn't have created this picture. This is not something I could have done. I mean, I wish, because then editorial work would just come my way so quickly. But yeah, I definitely couldn't have created this. And I think again, it just speaks to that magic, and you really don't know it's going to come. And you know, if this photo never came, sorry, that would also be okay, because it's not photography for me also isn't necessarily this thing where it's about the final image. I'm learning that it's so much more about just being out in the world and engaging with the world. And if I'm ever at home and I'm at home for too long, I feel like cooped up, and I start to feel really bad about myself. It's mostly just because I'm not out in the world experiencing and talking to people. And I think, you know, it's for me, photography is so much about connection and understanding place and people, um and yeah, like there's all these pictures now of no people in them, and I think it's just because like I also want to show you the place, and I want you to understand what we're seeing in Central Park is not just people, but it's also this magical place where my Canadian friends hang out on the frozen pond. But in other projects as well, you know, I think it's important to show sort of an environment, and you know, the photos like this that are a little wider out with these kids playing, who later got mad at me for taking their picture, but that's okay. I've also learned that sometimes people don't want you to take their picture, and that happens too. But that's a whole other thing. Uh, but you know, yeah, and then I guess the fear of approaching strangers, it was there at the beginning, and it was really tough for me to get over. But I've learned that um, pretty much the worst that somebody's ever going to say to you is no. And I mean, they might tell you to take a hike or something, but essentially what they're telling you is no. And that's okay. You just move on. You pick up and move on. Sometimes you get a bunch of no's in a row. You know, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that everybody says yes to me all the time. You know, some people want to they want to cuddle with their partner and not be annoyed by some random dude coming up to them with a camera. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's really more for me, it's like kind of a stream of, when I put these things together as well, it's like a stream of consciousness. It's really it's just I'm trying to flow through it. And yeah, anyways, I think that's kind of all I have to say about the Central Park work. This one to me was like the myth of Sisyphus. He's kind of like pushed the boulder up the hill, and he's never really getting up. Yeah, I guess if I still have time, I'll keep going to talk about a little bit of other work. I don't know.
I think you still have about like 5 minutes if you want to.
All right, let's keep going.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so this work is not in Central Park. It's in the Imperial Valley in California. And I guess why I want to show it is because it's sort of just talking about another place, but it's also quite different. I'm not walking, I'm driving, and you know, I'm seeing people and I'm pulling over and I'm saying, "Hey, what's up? How are you?" And this all started just out of a just pure curiosity. My grandparents live in Palm Springs, and it's essentially through a dart at a board. And I said, "What is this green spot on the map in the middle of a desert, and why is it there?" And out of nowhere, in the middle of this barren, hostile place, is this lush green valley. And upon the first couple trips, you know, I didn't research. I just went there and I talked to people. And what I learned is that it's this huge agricultural space, and it produces like a lot of vegetables for the country. And they also use so much water from the Colorado River. And now that I've researched, they use more water than the states of Arizona and Nevada combined. And it's just this tiny little agricultural space. And the river's like running out of water. So this is where I'm running in personally now. I'm running into this conundrum of like what I talked about before with the journalistic part and the fiction part. And this project is pulling me, it's trying so hard to pull me over to this journalistic part. And I'm constantly resisting this urge to like to make it into a thing. And I think that's because the moment I'll speak for myself, the moment I start to think about it in a way of like, this is happening, I must document it, then my mind switches and then I can't photograph something honestly and with pure instinct and curiosity, it starts to turn into something almost like there's a set list of what I need to accomplish. And I can't work that way. Like sometimes when you get editorial work, they or commercial work, they give you almost like you have a shot list, and that really messes with my brain. My brain starts to get all wiry, and you know, like sometimes I just want to be if I want to sit down for an hour to think about what's happening in the world, I really would love that luxury, but this is a project that I'm sort of struggling with that personally right now. Thankfully, I mean, not thankfully, but I don't live there, so I'm not constantly going every day. But so I get to kind of sit back and take some time away from it. But this is one of the canals, for example, that they dug, and it's bringing all this water from the river into the valley. And you know, I spent a whole afternoon with this man. He was lovely and showed me around, and it's for me, it was really interesting because the Central Park work was my first time really engaging with people, as I mentioned. Now going into whole other places and doing it again, it's really exciting. And I'm learning, it's just, again, like I'm just learning so much about the world and myself. And like I would never be in this place if it wasn't for a camera. And I think there's got to be something said about that. I hope that's super relatable because I always find myself in the most random places and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm here because of this, you know, overpriced thing on my shoulder. But it's exciting and yeah, and I guess again with this one, same thing as the other project and with all projects, it's I'm not trying to like give a definitive view of something. I'm not trying like before I wasn't trying to say like this is Central Park or like this is the Imperial Valley. I don't have that authority and I don't ever want to claim to have that authority. It's more of just like I mean, it's not even necessarily a narrative. It's just like an idea of a place like that I'm taking pictures of, that I'm sort of conveying through pictures and my thoughts and yeah, I mean, there's not as many people in these photos because I haven't been there as many times. I haven't been able to spend as much time there. My grandparents aren't. It's just hard to get there, but I really hope I can go back and more often this year. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say. I think I'm out. Yeah,
Thank you so much.
of
Your
course.
work is truly extraordinary and so lyrical and so beautiful. It's funny, like I did a kind of park project during the pandemic as well, and my pictures, like I just think of them in contrast. There's so much anxiety in them, and then in your park pictures, everything is just like calm and beautiful.
Mhm.
There's just this great peace in all of this work. So yeah, thanks for sharing your book project and this new work. It's fabulous. I do have a million questions, but we have a second photographer whose
Of
work to
course.
see, and we're gonna go on to Olga's work and get a different view of street portraiture. So yeah, I'm gonna read Olga Ginzburg's bio. Olga Ginzburg is a Belarusian American photographer based in New York City with an interest in narrative open-endedness and its potential for subtle and layered meaning. Her work explores notions of place, identity, home, community, and biculturalism. A graduate of the City College of New York, in 2019, the work she has been making on Staten Island was included in the triennial at the Alice Austin House Museum, which subsequently led to her first editorial assignment. Since then, Olga's work has appeared regularly in the New York Times and other leading news outlets and has been featured on ABC's Eyewitness News 7 in New York City. So Olga, I'm very much looking forward to seeing your work. And if you just want to take it away and share, and then we'll come back and have a big discussion with everybody about all of this wonderful work we're seeing.
Thank you so much, James. So I want to thank everyone who's here tonight with us. Just really honored to have everyone join. It's obvious that we're all passionate about this medium and how it allows us to move through the world and relate to others. It is pretty wild. I mean, not wild. It's, as you said, Scott, it's relatable. So much of what you said is my experience. And you're going to hear it mirrored in the way I talk about the photographs and what I think of, photography. However, I can't do what you did, which is it's like, it's incredible to me how you could just flow through photographs and continue talking and sharing your thoughts and experiences. For me, it's like patting my head and rubbing my stomach. I can't do that. So I'm probably just going to quite literally talk about a little bit to give, like to contextualize and give background about this work. But I think I'm just going to I don't know, kind of pull back the curtain and talk about the photographs and my experiences with each one. So I, grew up, was born in Belarus, and when I was quite young, we immigrated to Brooklyn, and so I grew up in South Brooklyn. But as a teenager, we moved to Staten Island, which I was very unhappy about and quite resentful, and didn't want to talk to my parents for some time, and continued to go to my Brooklyn high school until I couldn't anymore because of the lengthy commute, and spent 2 years of high school here and some of college before I left. I was very happy to leave and spent so much of my adult life living in Manhattan and some time abroad as well. And then I moved back. I was kind of in a transitional time in my life. Finally finished school. I went back to school, but I was already in my late 20s. I did pick up the camera, and I did fall in love with the medium outside of academia when I met my late partner, who was a painter, also a wonderful street photographer. He was in love with cinema. He was very much a cinephile. He had photo books around, art books, and I just slowly over time, I didn't think of it. I tried writing, I tried drawing, all sorts of things. But it was really through these photo books, James, very much Dan Arbus and Helen Levitt and Rossi and, so many others, and Winogrand and Frank. And looking at this work, these beautiful bodies of work changed how I sort of perceive the world, because, sort of quiet, ordinary moments were elevated into something that could be really lyrical and moving. So I was a street photographer for many, many years. And but really moving back to Staten Island, which I thought was moving back, really I thought was going to be for no more than a year. I'd finally finished school, hadn't quite figured out what I wanted to do professionally. For so many years, what I'd done professionally had nothing to do with photography, as I was kind of quietly and slowly developing as a photographer, kind of on my own. But it's so much of what James, you said, and you, Scott, it's, well, I figured while I'm here, I may as well kind of nose around and see how this place has changed. I didn't really spend much time here. Even when I was living here as a teen, I would always try to run off to the city every chance I got, or hang out with friends in Brooklyn. But I couldn't believe it. I lived just like a stone's throw from the local beach, from the bay, and it's so beautiful. And we've got this really gorgeous marshland. I should probably start like moving through photographs. But anyway, I'll continue to talk about all of that. But I really started to care about this place. And again, much, mirroring what Scott was saying, like, yes, I fall into random conversations, just even standing in line at the grocery store. However, it's the camera that allows you, like, so many times I wouldn't have a reason to approach somebody if I didn't have the camera on me. And sometimes it's somebody else who might approach me because they're curious about my camera. And as that conduit for like conversation and connection is just like miraculous to me. So I'll start just kind of talking about the photographs then. This is the local high school, and which I was adamant about not going to. It just resembled, I think, by different architects that were like, at least maybe it was rumored that they designed prisons, and it kind of resembles one to me. which is silly. But anyway, but now I'm enthralled by this place. You know, I sometimes on a day off will time it so that I'm walking past it as like thousands and thousands of teens with raging hormones are pouring out of it, and they terrify me and enthrall me and intrigue me all at the same time. And with these girls, I don't know, I guess I saw myself in them. I'm old enough where I can be like, oh my God, I could be their mom, but I also see myself in them. And you know, also I think about, I know it's so minor, but like that rock, this was a few years ago, that rock isn't there anymore. I'm not sure why they would have moved it. But it was like where kids would hang out, where I would sit sometimes under the shade of a tree on a really hot day, and just kind of, it's on the edge of this really huge field near my home. Um, Now kids don't hang out there as much anymore. I'm not sure. It's such a random thing to just go missing. But I miss that rock, and I like try to remember that it's not, I'm not conscious about it. I wouldn't say it's why I take photographs or the primary reason, but they are historical records, even these in these small ways. And it's just kind of amazing. The difference, I guess, between myself and maybe Scott and his work is that this work is very much made where I live. I've always found it a little bit not easier, but certainly less intimidating to go to another neighborhood, another borough, another city or country and approach people, because chances are I won't see them again. Whereas here I see people over and over again. And, you know, I had mixed feelings about that when I started this work. And now it's probably my favorite thing about it. But I have seen these girls since, and they've blown me off. They don't, you know, I sent them the photos. They seemed really happy with it, but now they kind of pretend they've never interacted with me. And I kind of love that. I don't mind at all. I think they're awesome. This is one of the first portraits that I made on Staten Island, and it was still when I was primarily using film cameras. And a friend lent me his twin lens reflex, a medium format camera. And you know, this is Lynn. This is very much before the pandemic. The house behind her is one that she's lived in for over 40 years. And I just thought she looked incredible. I didn't know what she was doing. I don't know. I didn't pay attention when I was a teenager. I didn't know that people put lime on grass so it comes back healthy in the springtime. I don't know these things, or I just certainly didn't then. And she was just kind of confused, didn't quite know why I wanted to make a photograph of her, but we ended up just, you know, we talked for a good long while, and I learned all sorts of things about her family, and she said, fine. And I don't know, she just seems so much of her place. And has since, I actually never saw her again, and the house has since been sold. This is a photograph of a young man who, it turns out, was Eastern European. I didn't know that he was. He looked so much like, I don't know, like what kids sort of dress like here, or some do. And I remember it was March 8th, also probably 2017 or 2018. And it's a massive holiday in Russia or former Soviet states. You know, now it's talked about a lot more. What is it? International Women's Day. But in Russia or the former Soviet Union, it is just like Valentine's Day and Mother's Day rolled into one. And just like this really huge thing. And you know, I just wanted to, I stopped him. I kind of guessed that he was buying those he bought those for his mom. And this is where we make those conscious decisions and how we want to place someone, because had I just placed him 10 feet over, you would have seen flowers behind him. And that lot, for whatever reason, that part of it was empty. And sort of the uninviting coldness and barbed wire against the sort of this youthful, lovely young man holding these beautiful flowers. I like to not always, I like to imply things, or I really like to leave things to be, as you know, as James had mentioned even in the intro, kind of open-ended. I want the viewer to inference, to make their own sort of guesses or ideas about what they're seeing. But yeah, those competence, I mean, there's truth in all of it, or not, or maybe it's dishonest, but we decide how we want to place someone. And I think those choices are really important. And I think there's no less truth in that than if I'd placed them any other way. Maybe I'll quickly just mention that, you know, oftentimes, certainly with street photography, they say not to, you know, if you kind of miss that initial moment, then it's kind of too late, kind of already missed it. And maybe it's a little bit different with street portraiture. They walked past, It was, I think, winter break. It was a warm day. There weren't that many people around. And then I kind of ran back. I don't know. I sort of saw them walking toward me in slow motion, and I didn't do anything about it because I also get very nervous still after all of these years. I mean, solidly have been stopping strangers and taking their photographs. I'd say 8 years now. I still get nervous all of the time. I still don't do it plenty of times. And of course, that haunts me because when you move past that fear, yes, they say no sometimes, and usually they're quite nice about it. And it's okay. It's okay when people say no. You don't want to impose. But often enough they say yes, and you have this interaction, and maybe you end up knowing them. Maybe they end up being a person in your life, or maybe you never see them again. But it just makes for me life so much richer and meaningful. So yeah, I just stopped these lovely young guys. I could imagine the water's just behind them. I could imagine where they were probably skating or walking. Yeah, I was always obsessed with timelessness as a young street photographer. Didn't want things to look like they were of their time. And then my thoughts about it began to change. And I really love contemporary photography, and I want it to be a marker of its time. I want someone to look back at these may not survive, at all, of course, but what if in 50 years or 100 years someone sees this and can imagine what the young people looked like, and also just I was walking home. It's quite suburban where I am. There aren't that many homes that have multiple units. And this one's kind of offbeat looking. I really like it. And I didn't say anything to her. I saw her. She was with a friend. I thought they looked really cool. But she kind of, I don't know, she said something to me, can maybe mention the camera, or maybe they were messing with me a little bit. And for me, it's like, I love that. Game on. You say something, I'm going to come right back at you. And yes, I will ask to take your photograph. And she was actually really cool, just learning how to skate. I think she was just getting into photography. And this is my friend, the first friend that I made when I moved back. This would have been 2016. I remember the very first photograph I made of him. It would have been a street photograph. He was riding past what's really a decommissioned airbase. Someone had written "fuck Trump." And he was kind of smiling, and he stopped to ask, if I'd taken a photograph of it, which I had. And he was actually quite unhappy about it. We couldn't be more different. His name is John Clatcher. It is kind of wild how different we are in every possible way. Personalities, characters, political leanings, I mean, you name it. Life experiences. He's done many things. He's also a retired firefighter, and he's just one of my favorite people. And God, I just love, through this medium, really, and our curiosity, we get to meet so many different kinds of people. It's incredible. But here he is. Again, it's a photograph. I don't know, maybe he looks like he's praying, it's possible. And in fact, he's quite religious and pious. And this is actually a church. He was painting the railing. The church wouldn't have survived if not for him and a couple of other volunteers. John is literally, I'm not saying that he's grown up on the island, born and bred, on these very blocks. He has not left the neighborhood, which is my neighborhood, Newport Beach. And service, I don't know, was down to maybe 6 people, like on a Sunday post Hurricane Sandy. And thanks to John and a few other people, they just kept this place going somehow, this 100-year-old church. But he was literally kind of messing around with me a little bit. And he was just trying to, I think, I don't know, ham it up. And he was just doing a handstand. And I took a couple of frames, and one where he's actually doing the handstand. But of course, this is the one for me. We get to make those choices. And this is a photograph of, and James, please tell me, because I have so many photographs and I've been rambling for quite some time.
Got about 6 more minutes, 6 or 7 more minutes.
Oh, I shouldn't have talked for so long in the beginning.
These are great stories. Keep going.
Okay. Thank you. So this is the beach. Of course, it's an island surrounded by water. That's so beautiful and life-giving, and yeah, it can be so destructive, as we know, with hurricanes and stuff. So, but anyway, I just saw this man. He was laying with his dog. Again, I see people in slow motion, people that really excite me or compel me. It's kind of, and I was that whole, like, do I stop? Do I not? Do I bother him? He's having this quiet moment. It turns out that, in fact, just maybe 20 feet over, and was his wife with a dog, and she had gotten a German Shepherd first, and he wanted one for himself, and he got a boy German Shepherd, and didn't think it through, and the dogs can't stay on one another, have to be kept in separate parts of the house. But anyway, he was surprised that I stopped and wanted to talk with him and take his photograph, and even asked if I was going to maybe put his head in a goat's body, Photoshop him having sex with something. I said my Photoshop skills weren't quite that good, but he was lovely. He was so lovely. And not often. It just depends. It's really case by case. But in this instance, as with so many, what I want to photograph is what I initially glimpsed. This is what he looked like when I saw him, and he very much changed as we were talking. And I don't think that that's false to do that, in what we do and what Scott and I do. Anyway, I'm gonna keep going. This is from 4th of July, and it's neighbors, my mom being one of them. Actually, they were gossiping, and I don't know, maybe you guys would disagree, but to me they look like maybe not American born, even though immigrant families, me being part of one of them, are probably some of the greatest patriots that I know. Anyway, I'm gonna realize I don't have much time at all. This was a day that I felt kind of dejected. I left the house late. I was kind of frustrated with myself. I didn't see many people out. And I was kind of just getting ready to go home. And then I saw these two families picnicking. And it turns out they live on the north shore of the island. And they'd come here for the first time ever, even though they've lived here for many years, as a kind of, I don't know, day trip. And I took a few frames of them just hanging out. And here this man was, there were 3 kids and he kept flipping them over his shoulder. But there was a moment where this boy just was a little bit tentative. And I try, being literal doesn't really appeal to me too much either. So I look for things in photographs that maybe could be symbolic or metaphor, there's a metaphor in there. I'm gonna keep going. This is a photograph I made for my a dear neighbor that has since passed away, which is heartbreaking to me sometimes to look at this photograph. But it was 2021, the spring. She had just started coming back into the office to work in the city, and I ran into her on an evening walk, as I did many evenings. And I was talking to her friend, and I turned around, and there she was, just kind of stretching, but she looked like a dancer to me. And I didn't mean to be rude to the friend, but my attention, went straight to my late neighbor. And this, just a few photographs I made of these young guys hanging out after school, also on a warm day, even though it was winter time. And I just wanted to show how important it just depends. Sometimes it's a 5-minute conversation, like Scott said, and sometimes you spend hours with a person, and sometimes they become dear friends that you see many times. But I don't know. I don't know if they were like a little surprised that I stopped them, and we're just a little bit awkward and very conscious of me, and so I waited for a moment where it was less that, and again I could see myself sort of reflected in this, in whom I see as the protagonist of this photograph, this young guy. Again, also I take many photographs that I think of as portraits, not just of people but of places, and again, without being overly literal or anything like that, this is the least populated borough that happens to be the most conservative, and patriotism is a big thing. I realize religion's also a big thing, but I don't know if I would have stopped to make this photograph if it was of a young man. I probably would have, but I was just so struck by the care that someone would have gone into making this for their daughter, for their loved one, while also hinting at these other things that we might think of as signifiers. Military is very heavy here. You see Rossi kids out, you see people recruiting. This man, oh my God, another really hard day in the city, always had the camera on me, didn't make a single image. Walking home, I decided to take a different route. And just, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was incredible. It was the most ordinary scene, somebody throwing a football in the middle of the street. This happens everywhere, all the time. Except he's of course wearing formal clothing and no top. And again, I walked past, I was my mind was exploding. I didn't know what to do with myself, but I was too nervous to stop. And then I went back. I was like, I can't, I have to talk to him, even if I don't make an image. And it turns out that he was shooting, rather throwing, wow, you could tell I'm really sports savvy. He was throwing a football around in front of his childhood home. And it was the day he buried his dad. It was after his dad's funeral. And I asked to make the image only after talking for a really long time. This woman I saw her, she looked incredible to me. I stopped to ask to take her photograph, and James, you'll stop me, even though there are many other photos.
I'd say like maybe like 2 more minutes and then
Sure.
go to a conversation. But
That
these
sounds
are
great.
fantastic stories. So
Thank you. So I asked her to make her photograph. She certainly didn't mind, except for her mom ran out, wanted to know what the hell I was doing. And when Photoville first left Dumbo, when it left lower downtown Brooklyn rather, and this was in 2020, the outset of the pandemic, and they kind of spread out into all the other boroughs. I was included in that the first one on Staten Island, and this image was a part of the exhibit. And unbeknownst to me, this woman walked past. It's on this beautiful sort of boardwalk we have. And she sent me a message on Instagram, and it was just a photograph of her the very next day. She was the one getting married, and she's standing in front of her with her husband in front of this whatever sign she was making. That was really special. And these are kids I saw on kind of apart from everyone. Obviously, it was after school. They were being really playful and really cute, and I loved what she was wearing. So I stopped to bother them, I guess. And they agreed to have their photograph taken. And then this is what they did, right? So like what Scott was saying, what I think about constantly, well, are you seeing someone's, like, are they doing this just for the camera? Are they doing it because they're being watched? And for me, I realized it doesn't really matter. If this is what they want to convey about themselves, then I think that there's just as much truth in that as any photographer could have taken if it was a clandestine snapshot. And then I don't know, do I keep going? Maybe I'll stop on this.
yeah, maybe
Yeah,
start on
maybe
this.
stop.
Sure. It's a shame because I actually like, anyway, it's all good. Now I'll realize to, not talk as much. This photograph I made I was running late to like an appointment, and I saw them and they were so beautiful, and I had to stop. I had to talk to them. And I was so grateful that I did. And we mostly talked about parenthood, something that I still dream of. I still dream of being a parent. He was surprised. He never imagined that he would be one, and he became one. And what he said was later in life. And right behind them, literally standing in front of a house that's in my neighborhood, where the guy, like a week after the 2020 election, already had Trump 2024 sort of flags and signs and has salacious things out front all the time. So I took some photographs once he agreed to be photographed with his daughter in front of that house. And then I thought, I don't know if that feels right. I mean, what am I trying to say? You kind of want to think about your intentions. And so I thought, look, this is, it's a beautiful day. He had just moved here, I think. He's very much a part of this neighborhood as much as anybody. We were just talking about something as beautiful as being a parent, and I'm going to honor him in this way. I'm not going to make some sort of salacious, image or anyway. So all these decisions that one has to make when one stops to photograph a stranger. Guys, thank you for listening to my rambling.
I think everyone out in the audience is just really lucky today because it's great, totally different approaches, beautiful images, and yeah, it's so much to learn. I mean, I do this, and I've learned so much just listening to both of you, but let's have a little conversation. And I thought I'd maybe open the conversation by asking Scott and Olga if they had questions for one another.
Yeah, I'll ask first if that's okay.
Yeah.
I got one. So New York, I was thinking about your work today when I was looking at it, and also when you were just talking, it was awesome. Like I loved hearing all the stories of each person. It's just so interesting. But you know, like New York is so historical with photography, and everybody has, you know, everybody's got photos of Manhattan or like in Brooklyn, there's Queen, everything is so documented, but I've never seen like a documentation of Staten Island. And you're like from Staten Island. Do you feel like this like a necessity, like a need? Is there something like you said that you were saying it's sort of like difficult to sort of photograph your hometown, like differently than what I'm doing, but do you feel like almost like you should be making a record of this place? And like, if so, like why?
That's a really great question. Thank you, Scott. I mean, I feel like, especially like the more I've researched, I've learned about lots of amazing photographers from here. I don't know if you guys have heard of Christina Sinsky. James, have you?
Yeah, I have her book. It's great.
Oh my, so I have her book too. Oh my goodness. This book. So she moved here in the 80s and made her body of work over 2 summers on Staten Island, black and white, large format.
Okay.
And the book didn't come out till decades later because she didn't feel like there was technology existed to print the work the way that she wanted it printed. Um, but to go back to what you were asking, um, when I first started to post images, as I was like stumbling into this and figuring out what I was going to do, and then I fell madly in love with this place, and it feels very much like my home in every sense of the world, spiritual and otherwise. I would post things to, let's say, Instagram, the only bit of social media that I've embraced, and people would comment, like New York friends, people who've been here for years or not all their lives, saying that they didn't, they gave them sort of an insight into a place that they hadn't really thought about much, or maybe just passed through or taken the ferry over and back. And I was like, I thought that was kind of okay. I'm like, that's kind of interesting. So I'm going to keep on doing this thing that I love and getting to know people, and and keep posting and kind of building this body of work, sort of to honor this place. And that kind of that emboldened me, or gave me sort of it just kind of gave me an insight into why I should keep on doing it, other than my own interests and curiosities. And I don't often think about what we would call an audience, but then I think, well, wait, why would I not want to? We make work because we want to share it, and we want to honor the people that we photograph and the places that we photograph. So maybe I do think about that a little bit. And I'm certainly not the only photographer. There's so many wonderful, wonderful photographers here, and artists. But yeah.
There's at least one or two Staten Island
Thank you.
photographers in the audience that I noticed.
I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Well, I mean, it's under document. I mean,
Right.
when you think of the millions of photographers in New York City, it's true that it's hard to come up with a million Staten Island photographers.
Yeah.
So, grateful to Olga for being one of those. Did you have a question for Scott, or you had mentioned before?
Yeah, Scott. So I was looking at your work, and just so incredibly beautiful. And you have these projects, and which I love, that you're sharing something that's in the process of being made, and something that you started in 2020, 2022, 2023, that's ongoing in all these different places on the West Coast, in this, South America. What does that feel like to you? Because as I'm here and as I've been, I'm sorry, I'm like asking a question and then I continue to talk. But just to contrast my experience, I'm making this work, but I'm also doing other things and taking other strains. And I'm also working on my first documentary and all these things, but it's very much of this place. And yours has you kind of go in all these different places and kind of all at the same time. Do you need that? Do you want that? Do you?
Need, that's a wild word. I think yeah, I mean, so I guess like now that I'm here in New York, I feel like I just want to get out of New York all the time. And like I love New York. It's like it's one of the best places I've ever been. It's an amazing place, but I don't feel so inspired to like photograph here anymore. And I don't know why. Maybe that I should probably hit that head on and see where that leads me. But like so one of the projects I'm working on is about kids who are racing go-karts in the United States. But like I grew up racing go-karts. So that's like a really personal one. And then the one in the desert, as I described, like my grandparents lived out there, and I kind of wanted to check it out, and now I'm like invested. And the one in South America you mentioned is in Brazil, and my partner is Brazilian, so like it's kind of whenever I'm there, I'm just like constantly involving in this thing. So I think I'm really privileged and like grateful that I have sort of these avenues and outlets that are away from home, because it's nice to like have an excuse to get away and sort of explore other things. But I am constantly talking to my friends about how like I need to photograph here. Like I'm here, I'm paying the rent, like I should figure something out where like I can go out every single day and photograph again. And I need to sort of, personally, I think I need to navigate that. Yeah, I need to figure that out.
By the way, I'm literally in the same exact like boat as you. I go into Manhattan all the time for work or whatever, and I have my camera on me and I don't make photographs. I was talking to James about it a little bit, the verticality of it. I don't know. I'm just so enamored with everything, and the landscape looks different. I experience weather and elements differently. I can breathe here. My shoulders drop, and I'm just so intrigued by people. And so now I'm like questioning myself, like I'm so now biased against, I wouldn't say other boroughs, but because everything's so Manhattan centric.
Uh-huh.
That I also am like questioning why I'm so, maybe I should not, we identify ourselves as, sometimes with very specific things or people or whatever. And maybe I should just broaden my.
But there's something to be said of like being able to leave the house and not have a camera and just like enjoy life. So sometimes it's nice to just like go out and enjoy life and not be like, oh, there's something beautiful. Like, guys,
Yeah.
wait up. I'm gonna go, like I should do that more. I think there's a balance, and I think I have a tendency to go like all one way or all the other way.
Yeah.
And it's something that, yeah.
Scott, I had a question for you. In your bio, it mentions that you had a BA in psychology. I'm wondering how that might inform your work. Like, I see a connection between psychology, especially portraits of strangers. But talk to us about that.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, I did psychology because as I said before, I was racing go-karts, and I was really set. Like I thought I was gonna make it. I thought I was gonna be in Formula One or IndyCar. I was sure of it as a child. And looking back, that was silly. But I think so. Then when I finally went to college, psychology's kind of lined up with me, and then I'm really interested in just humans and the way we work and the way we tick, and the why and the how of everything. And it definitely relates to photography. And I think after I graduated, I struggled because in my early 20s, because I didn't want to work in HR, and I didn't really want to go and become a shrink or anything. So I really just bounced around all these jobs, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be. And when photography sort of landed on my doorstep, it really just clicked. Like it's something that it takes what I learned, and yeah, when you're taking a portrait of somebody, you're talking to somebody, there is like a lot of back and forth, and there's a lot of psychology there of like this interaction. And I think photography, similarly like poetry, are really getting to like who we are as human beings. And I think that's my like really long-winded answer of saying that they connect. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. One question I have for both of you. This is like when I made street portraits, I found that the difference between a successful portrait and one that's less successful is so razor thin sometimes. But how do you know when you've got it? Like sometimes I think I got it, and then I get home, I didn't get it. Like, what for you, each of you, maybe Olga can go first, makes a successful street portrait?
I don't know, James. I often don't got it, like, and that's okay. I'll come home and I'll look at, and I don't, maybe it's having been a film photographer for so long before I switched to primarily digital. I don't make that many frames. I don't make that many images of a person or people.
I was wondering about that. So like I will often do if like 10 photos or something and go all the way around them from different angles, but you're not like that. You're
Generally not. I could probably stand to move around a person more. I just kind of I can sort of see it and feel it, and it's really the person that's giving so much of themselves. So I'm like, just they're like Scott was saying, they're playing off you and you off them, and there's so much psychology involved, and it could be so intimate, and I'm always so grateful to the person for their time and, you know, allowing themselves to be seen. And you know, you just know when you see it. But I you know, looking back at the camera after I leave having photographed someone, and I try to not do that. And sometimes I just sit with the photographs for a while, and maybe I don't really love it, or I wish I'd done something differently, and I blame myself. It's certainly not the person. But either I learn from that, or I come back to the photograph sometime later and I do see it, there was something there. But all I really want is to feel something, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And
So you're photographing a feeling as much as a person.
yeah.
How about you, Scott?
Yeah. Ultimately, at the end, I think you want, it's really, I don't know if I can put it to words. It's really, like my mom always asks me this question, like, how do you know it's a good picture? Like my picture of your dad is just as like, this is a great picture. Like, look how nice your dad looks. And yeah, it's hard to really, I was talking about this with my friend the other day, like just a couple of days ago, actually, about how like sometimes it's the first picture you take and then you keep going because you think, oh, it's going to be better, and I gotta keep working this thing, and you shoot a roll, or you shoot 2 rolls or something, and you shoot 20 photos, and when you get it back, it's that first photo, and you're like, wow, I just wasted like $50. I could have just sat there with that first photo, but you don't know. That's like, I often don't. Sometimes you do and you feel it, but it's really difficult to know like what makes it so right and what makes it so wrong. It's just like a matter of like just little tiny milliseconds that sometimes it's just right. And sometimes you miss it and you know you missed it, but you keep going because you think it's going to happen again and it doesn't because you're stubborn. And then that's just, yeah, that's another time. But that's who we are. We're always going to keep doing it. I think I'm not going to not keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, follow up on that, like two things. Oh, I think Olga mentioned it, maybe how, or maybe it was you actually. I can't remember how you just kind of come across people in a certain way, and you want them to be that in that same way. That's how it is for me. But what happens when you spotted someone and they're kind of perfect, but then they give you a photo, you know, their Instagram photo face, or you know, they do this kind of thing. Like, and what are some other things that you try to not do when you make a street, you try to avoid?
You want to?
You
Scott, you go first, then maybe Olga.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think Olga's the one who said it, but I also do the similar thing. Like if I see somebody, it's usually that's what draws me there in the first place, like what they're doing in that moment, that time, how they're lying down, or however it works. But if they start to change or they try to give me a face, usually I try to talk a little bit first, and I try to talk to them and we get comfortable, and then walls break down, and then they don't do that. But sometimes if they do that, like, I don't know, it depends on my mood. Sometimes I'll just say like, hey, let's drop it. Like let's like shake it off, you know, and I'll shake off myself, and maybe they do it too as a joke, and or I tell a joke or something. It's like, because sometimes it's just like a sense of security too. The whole posturing thing is how we relate ourselves to a camera. I think we're so used to just being like, you know, and but it's difficult when somebody's like, hey, let's not do any of that and let's be like who you really are, quote unquote. And yeah, I don't really have a method.
How do you know who they really are, really?
Exactly. You can just say like what a photo can even do that is preposterous, but it's like what you're trying to achieve, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
I think for me, I allow the person to do what they naturally want to do when they first agree to have their photograph taken. And if they're doing the peace sign or smiling, I often will say something like, you look so lovely, you know, or you look really great. It's a really nice photograph of you. But I would love to see something where you just feel a little more relaxed. And if you want to convey how you're feeling through, you know, your eyes or you know, but I sometimes flat out say, I'd love to see something where you're not smiling or not smiling as much. And then just keep talking to them. And
That's
yeah.
James.
yeah.
There are,
Let's go
sorry
to,
to interrupt.
yeah,
There are lots of
I know,
questions in the
I know.
chat.
I could ask a
So
million more, but yeah, let's go to
I had
the
one
How
more
about-
for Scott, but I could ask him later.
how about if we do some of the questions in the chat, and then for those people who want to stay longer, we can go back to you asking each other questions. How about that? Edward, can you pick some, please?
Sure. Here's one from Julian. He says, I think you both said that even today you're nervous about approaching strangers, but would you say you get more yeses today than when you started?
You go first.
I don't know. I don't have the metrics on that. I still get a little heartbroken when someone says no, even though I really know best. Then I don't take it personally.
would you ever argue with someone if they say no?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I mean, he won't. You'll just move on.
Oh my gosh, never. People, the people that say no to me are usually so unbelievably sweet about it, you know, and I totally get it. Like Scott said, like I'm so awkward in front of the camera, you know. I think a lot of photographers would say that they are. I totally, you know, empathize. Do I get more yeses? I don't know. But I just try to get out of my way as much as possible, and it's okay. You know, again, James and I, you know, we were talking about a little bit about Baldwin Lee, the amazing photographer who made that incredible body of work in the South in the 80s. And he talked about how painfully shy he was, and he kind of beat it out of himself. So he got to the point where he could literally knock on a stranger's door and ask to come in and ask them to make their photograph or whatever. That's incredible. I'm still getting there. But I'm okay. I'm okay to be nervous, because then they see that, you know, hopefully they'll read my intention and my energy, and then I'm genuinely interested in them. You just have to keep doing it. And then Scott.
And energy, you know, one's positive energy really is conveyed. But Scott, yeah, what do you do to quiet those voices in your head that say, "Oh no, I can't interrupt this group"? Or
sometimes I didn't, and I would walk away. But now I kind of gotten, I don't really ever not do it anymore. And I would say, like, I don't know if the percentage is higher or lower to answer the question in a literal sense, but I definitely think that I don't take a no the same way that I used to. Like, if somebody says no now, I just go cool and I walk. It's like doesn't bother. It's right off the shoulder. Whereas when I was starting out, like it would crush me. But I'm also just really emotional, so it would just destroy me. But now, like, somebody says no, and you know, that's their life. But it's sometimes, like, as you asked Olga, like, would I ever try to convince them otherwise? I have, and I've won, and I think it's been for a better sense. Like, they're not really interested in me there, and then I'm like, oh, come on, but you guys look so beautiful, like, you know, like, this is never gonna happen again, or some ridiculous thing, and they let me do it, and then I end up hanging out, and it turns out to be this nice moment. But I never want to feel like I'm taking something either. That's a big thing. So it's, I mean, I guess with photography, I mean, we kind of always are in a way, but you gotta, it's sort of this weird thing. But yeah, to answer the question literally, I think I have no idea. I think the percentage is probably the same. Like 9 times out of 10, they say yes.
Okay, very good. We have something that's a little more down to earth, maybe, from Serban. He's asking a few questions. One, do you direct people how to pose similar to a regular portrait shooting? But I think you all actually already answered that pretty much. But the other questions are, do you also get the subjects to sign model release forms in order to use the photos commercially? And do the people also receive a copy of the photo? And whoever wants to.
I guess I can start. I don't use model release forms. I share the photographs with the people. I wasn't always great at that. Now I very much, like, I want to, not, people don't always, sometimes they say it's cool, I'm okay. But I love sending people their photographs. I don't have many instances of it being a little, you know, we're going to talk about ethics a little bit. Just a quick example. I saw this really beautiful couple and what I perceived to be a younger brother, and their dog hanging out in a field in my neighborhood. And I asked to make their photographs, and they said okay, and I made more than I normally would. And I shared them. And the young woman asked me to share the photos with her first. You know, would exchange Instagrams or whatever. And I did very much. And her response was a little bit different from what I would normally get. It wasn't like a thank you. It was kind of like she wanted more photos. And then I included one of the images of her brother in a post. It wasn't just a standalone photograph. I try to make them sort of be little books or little stories within themselves. So, and then she immediately wrote to me saying like, to take the post down. She felt really uncomfortable. She thought that her brother might get recognized, her little brother, even though, I don't know, I thought he looked great. He looked beautiful. There was like a wisdom beyond his ears and his eyes. And I didn't understand that part. Meaning I missed the part where I was meant to ask her consent. I thought, we were cool. But I immediately took it down. I wasn't gonna, this is someone's life, and this is their young family member, and it's a child. So I instantly took that down. But I generally don't. I have not really used photographs for commercial purposes. And I share the work, and it's usually received well, and people are grateful. Yeah.
Yeah, Scott, in addition to your answer to that question directly about model releases, maybe an ethical story from you would be interesting too. I know that's a concern for you.
Sure. I do not use model releases. I think the moment you take out a piece of paper, the entire interaction is gone. It just becomes this like legitimate professional thing. And I think even like if somebody approaches me in a park and takes my picture and then they hand me a piece of paper to sign my life away, I'm gonna probably start thinking they're gonna use it in a weird way. My interaction is gonna flip too. So no, I don't use that. And I always give people their photos, or at least I always try. Sometimes they give me phone numbers and I send the text or email, and then it bounces back, and I have them write the emails on my phone. So, I do it as best I can, but I always try to get their information when I take their picture. And the ethical question, I guess right now, something that I'm dealing with is I'm photographing the kids who race go-karts, and their age are from 6 to 12, and they're all minors, and it's a really interesting landscape to navigate. Like the parents all know who I am, they all accept me, and they all let me take their photos of their kids, and it's all fine and great, but I still feel sometimes like sharing them on the internet and stuff is a bit odd, although they all have their own Instagram accounts because they're all trying to become professional race car drivers. And so it's murky, I guess I would say, the thing, because they're minors. But I've never really had a dilemma with anybody asking me to take a photo down, like Olga was just describing, thankfully. But
what about like a vulnerable population? Like you see someone who's maybe obviously homeless but interesting photographically. Have you wrestled with that ever? It hasn't come up.
I mean, I've wrestled with it in my mind, but I don't ever want to like personally, I know that like Statistics, which is like one of my favorite books by Gregory Halpern, like a lot of people in that book are homeless or unhoused and stuff, and I think it's a magnificent body of work. But I personally don't want to like document people who are down and out, or I'm just not really interested in that. And yeah, it's marvelous. The sequencing in that book is exceptional. But I'm personally not interested in that, so I just don't really ever even approach it. It just kind of It's not really something I'm interested in documenting. Not to say that it's not worth documenting. There are people that should, but I'm not that person.
Okay.
Here's something else. Let's see, this is from Jesse, who's curious about what you tell your subjects when you approach them. Do you tell them about your intention, that like your specific body of work that you're working on, or do you just tell them that you love how they look?
I definitely like introduce myself, tell them that I live, I'm local. I've been making this body of work, so I do introduce myself. Yeah, and it flows quite organically, because again, I don't always take the photograph first. Sometimes it's a conversation that I have with someone. I do fall into conversations with strangers, and in all sorts of ways. Scott?
Yeah, same. My camera's always out too. So
Exactly, and never hidden. Like you can't not. It's so much a part of it, you know.
they see me coming, and it's not like, hey, how are you doing? And then suddenly I'm pulling this thing out of the
Yeah.
bag.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of, I'm pretty upfront, and then if I'm working on a project, I might say it up front, or I might lead with something else, like they look great, and then get into the project later, but always upfront that I'm a photographer. And yeah.
And what are some methods you both use to help build that mutual trust and vulnerability with the subject in the brief period of time you might have with them? Is there some way to gauge when you've reached a point where that trust is there and it's the right time to photograph them, or is that just a general feeling?
I guess I would say, I think I sort of mentioned this when I was talking. If there's an expectation that somebody's going to be vulnerable with me and sort of show me a part of who they are, then I need to do that too. And that can be like, and it's not like a show. It's more like I'll be inquisitive, and I'll ask a couple of questions about who they are and what they're doing and why they're there, where they're from, how they know each other, something like that. And then it usually will spark something in me, and I'll say, oh, that's crazy. Like, my dog is also a border collie. I don't have a dog, but I'm just making up a random fake thing. Like, I also have a cat who's right here, and aren't they great? And then you kind of, I think it's just, as humans, we just love to see similarities, and like nowadays, apparently we like to point out all the differences between us because, I don't know, we're ridiculous. But I think that we're so similar to each other always. And I feel like the moment you start to see that somebody is so much alike you, even though you might be from polar opposite places, it just really allows you to just be like, oh wow, and you get so comfortable. And it works with me too when people are trying to get me to sign up for the SPCA or something. There's sometimes they can break me. So
I thought that question was really like thoughtfully framed. I really appreciate it, and my response is going to be probably very unhelpful, but it's like you're just kind of yourself, like I don't know, that time in one's life, when I photograph teenagers, I could so easily access that place and imagine myself when I was their age. And quite literally, it helps because I was a teenager living there and walking those same blocks and hanging out in those same places when I was their age. I don't know. I'm drawn to someone, and sometimes it's not even something that I can conceptualize or like I'm even entirely conscious of. I just know that if I screw up the courage to come up to them and to talk to them, then we somehow naturally fall into conversation. I introduce myself and what I do. And as I said before, I don't always take a photograph on the front end. It may happen at the very end before we part, but it's an instinctual kind of thing, and you sort of gauge the interaction and sort of read the room as they speak, but really you're just yourself. And yeah, it's that, I don't know. I'm nothing to really delve into or whatever, or get psychological about, but I've had this thing most of my life. I feel it's like an insider, outsider kind of feeling. I feel like I straddle, and maybe many of us feel that way. I don't know if it's because I was an immigrant who was brought here as a child and I'm very American culturally, but nonetheless, I think it helps me having this feeling, this insider outsider feeling. It just draws me to other people, to so many other kinds of people, and maybe they see something in me. We're not othering each other in a bad way ever. I would never want to do that, but we're still very different, and that's sort of a part of that interaction. But just whoever asked that, please be yourself, and it's naturally going to happen.
yeah, a smile goes a long way.
Yeah.
Great advice.
James, how about another 5 minutes? How's that?
That's okay with me. Yeah, I could go on all night, honestly. These questions are so interesting, and their answers. Did you have another question, Edward, or do you want?
No, for you can take over.
Okay. You mentioned, Scott, let me see here. You mentioned Henri Cartier-Bresson, and I actually had saw a quote that sort of reminded me of your work. He said, in a portrait, I'm looking for the silence in somebody.
Hmm.
What do you think about, actually, there's two questions. They're sort of related, sort of unrelated. But what do you think about the silence in people, like introspection? And you did touch on this, and maybe Olga could talk on this one. So maybe I'll divide it. Okay, so you go with that question. How about silence? And I'll have another.
I wonder what he meant by that. That's really interesting. I guess what I take from that is he's implying that it's the moment when somebody's kind of just like let go and just like relax into themselves. And that's kind of how I see it. But it's interesting because he also never really took portraits. That wasn't really his jam.
We don't think of him that way. Yeah, I
No.
thought it was an interesting quote.
Yeah, because he had that whole Bible about in his book in the Decisive Moment about how he had all these rules. You could only use a 35mm lens, and it had to be black and white, and you can't crop. He had all these crazy tight rules. But yeah, maybe I think that's maybe what he's talking about. And to me, I think that's quite a beautiful way of putting it. I wish I said that myself, but yeah, he's getting at something. I don't really have much to add. I just think that it's interesting. I think
yeah, I'd see it in your photos. There is something quiet in your photos. So yeah.
Thanks. I think that made me think of Emily Dickinson's line from that poem where she says, "Tell the truth, but tell it slanted." I think I don't know if that relates to what he's saying, but I'm always reminded of that, like in how when you're photographing people and you're taking their portraits or doing their projects, like Olga is doing as well, like she was saying, like you don't say it so literally. And I think maybe somehow this ties to what Brisson is saying, but maybe I'm just reaching now. But go ahead, Olga.
Olga, I want to ask you something like about walking and street portraiture. Can you talk about how maybe walking is an important part of street portraiture, or making this?
I mean, it's been everything to me, because up until a year and a half ago, I did not have a car. I did not learn how to drive until just a couple of years ago. So heavily dependent on public transportation and just my own 2 feet. But yeah, I mean, maybe it's essential for a lot of us, yourself included, James, and you too, Scott, when you were walking and would make random turns in the park and not knowing what to expect, and things open up suddenly. That's sort of the magic in it. Very much why we would call these chance encounters. And I what's that French term? A flaneur, someone who walks, but without necessarily intention, but walks a city. And a writer would put those encounters down in words or conversations they've had, and then we get our vestiges, or these photographs that we've made. But walking has always been just like so essential to my being, to my sanity, to me exploring a place. And even now that I drive, what photographs I didn't get to were photographs that I made just of people at bus stops. Because you're in contact with humanity a lot more when you're using, things like public transportation. So maybe that I miss, and we'll start up again. I almost want to ask you, James, that, because it's so essential to you.
Well, I think you answered it beautifully, actually. I don't want to add to that, because that was so lovely. But it is 8:30 and it's late, and I know everyone's given of their time so generously. So I want to thank you. Do you have any last words, Scott? And then we'll just wrap it up.
No, just thanks to everybody, and yeah, this was really, really great. Thanks you.
All right.
Yeah, that was amazing. You guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
everybody.
Yeah, follow Scott and Olga.
That's right. Follow them on Instagram. Check out Scott's class that's coming up. And Scott, Olga, and James, please stay so we can chat for a couple more minutes. And thank you all for joining, and see you at the next talk. We have more talks coming up. One with Ellen Frame, and one with 3 of our scholarship students who will present work in progress. So all of that will be happening soon.
Thank you for your time and your comments, which I haven't read.
Yeah,
certainly not all of them, so can't wait. Just thank you for your presence and engagement.